stepped back into the studio and caught the remark from Peter, who admitted to Walter that he had noticed several things in the Netherlands that gave the impression that a form of police state was becoming a real threat to society. Coffee shops were regularly confronted with an impossible policy of tolerance and slowly pushed to the outskirts of major cities. TV programs like Spouten and Slikken, Shoot and Swallow, which provided education on sex and drugs, were increasingly criticized, and a prudishness reminiscent of the 1950s seemed to blanket the entire country. The major Christian parties like the CDA and the SGP formed the front in the battle against what they perceived as declining and blurred moral standards in the Netherlands over the last 20 years. With the absence of Wilders, the PVV had now become one of the parties whose support had significantly increased and had added fuel to the fire now that their leader, most likely by one of them, had been murdered. The other parties were still hesitant, as the report from the investigation committee would not be released for another 2 weeks. But according to some, the evidence was mounting, making it clear who the culprits were and why. The zero-tolerance policy of the police was still in force, and the number of checkpoints was increasing. The word curfew had also resurfaced. Freedom of speech was diminishing, and what was also becoming apparent was the fact that comedians were increasingly watching their words and were even being refused in various places. This was in response to a performance by a well-known comedian who had made a disabled person the target of his humor and, according to the local newspaper, had seriously offended him by remarking that he had trouble making phone calls with his mobile after seeing him struggle with operating his wheelchair. This was a sign that freedom of speech was on its last legs. It's time for some good music and a short break. See you soon. Pink Floyd, Money. We're back for the last part of the program. Heavy terms are being used here, and in my opinion, we're heading into a rather intense period. The same thing is happening in Europe, now under the guise of free trade and labor mobility. Countries like the Netherlands are flooded with Eastern European workers, like the Poles, who earn starvation wages in their own country and come here to boost their income. Currently, there are around 300,000 well-skilled displaced workers. At least 100,000 of them will settle permanently. The surplus of cheap labor leads to a different wage scale, which keeps getting lower. The result? Many jobs are taken by the Poles and other Eastern Europeans, keeping wages low and the producer making even more profit. Poland itself receives an influx of other Eastern European workers with even lower wages and prospects in their own country. This is already noticeable in construction companies that legalize their huge profits in this way and disregard the rights established by former workers in consultation with their unions. Unions have become nothing more than carnival parodies of themselves. The police recently provided a clear example of how the image has changed over the years by boycotting the Ajax-PSV match. Instead of taking to the streets and not issuing tickets for a few days to make it clear to politicians that it costs the state money, they preferred to annoy the citizens by ruining their Sunday enjoyment. And then they wonder why the public has no sympathy for them. This applies to several unions that, when they go on strike, dressed up like a carnival band, start singing a polished anthem as soon as a camera is nearby. Meanwhile, the unified entrepreneurial Europe, with its open borders, is laughing all the way to the bank and trampling over the European battlefields with mergers, restructuring, and the necessary reorganizations like a giant tank, all under the guise of unity, but where the identity of a population can only be found in sports and other cultural manifestations, and freedom of speech is increasingly hollowed out. I have to wrap up your argument here due to time constraints, and can only draw the conclusion that we are facing an exciting and threatening period. Our phone panel is available again until midnight to answer any questions or comments regarding this program. From this point, I can only inform you that everything is still calm. So rest assured, and in the words of a well-known television presenter, Sonia Barand, wake up healthy tomorrow morning. I would like to thank our guests, Peter Teteru and Walter Kroos, for their cooperation and you for your attention. Until next week, this was Focus on Friday. End tune. Frank and Peter left the studio immediately after saying goodbye to Walter. and they could already hear the phones ringing. Frank told Peter that during the broadcast, he had received a call from Willink, so he wouldn't be visiting the EBI on Monday, but would have a meeting with the lawyer instead. Together with the photos, there was enough to think about calmly, and Frank decided he needed to do just that. What a situation, he thought. After passing through the necessary checkpoints, Frank arrived at the campsite, his home, his sanctuary, it seemed. The feeling of safety took over again, and he prepared a simple meal for himself after taking care of his faithful menagerie. He sat behind his PC and opened his email. Suzanne had sent him an email titled, "Good News." There would be a huge climbing event taking place at the Zuiderplas area. The true inhabitants of Den Bosch call the island De Ster, the star, because of its shape, like a peninsula located in the Zuiderplas. The event would consist of a demonstration for the climbing sport. There would be opportunities to climb a wall, and various stalls would provide all sorts of information. All of this accompanied by a video wall, food stalls, and some local bands. Suzanne thought it was an excellent idea to go and see this event, take some photos, and maybe do a bit of climbing. The festival would last the entire day and was free to attend. It was scheduled for Monday, so she assumed it wouldn't be too crowded. She asked if he might be interested in going along and wanted him to let her know. When Frank read the day of the event, he was furious. Monday was the day he had the meeting with Everett Willink, and that was just more important. Shit, he thought. Can't anything go smoothly? He didn't yet know that this wouldn't be the only setback this weekend. After playing a game on his PC, where he couldn't concentrate, he read the news pages and saw the same image everywhere. Lots of weapons, soldiers, tanks, roadblocks. He longed for a moment to be back in the 70s when his life didn't have so many responsibilities. The countless kilometers he had traveled with his friends on their motorcycles or in their cars through the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany were countless, and there was always something fun happening along the way. Even getting lost was fun because it forced you to ask for directions in a language you were unfamiliar with. This often resulted in hilarious situations, like one with one of his best friends from that time, Frank de Boer from St. Michiel's Gestel. He was actually nicknamed Hercules because of his rather deep voice and large build. They were driving together with a friend through the Ardennes, looking for the town of Bastogne. This happened with a car that was already strange for that time, but had character, a DAF. The saying, "every weirdo drives a DAF," didn't really apply to these two, but it wasn't entirely off either. In a small remote village, Hercules suddenly had an urgent need to go to the bathroom and absolutely did not want to be seen or caught on the side of the road, as he was embarrassed about it, quite understandably at that time. He wanted to know what the French word, since they were in the Walloon part of Belgium, for a toilet was. Frank told him it was le clos, or something like that, but they also knew the word toilet, so no problem. Hercules wanted to stop at a small castle because there was someone there who seemed to be looking around. Perhaps he knew the solution. At the moment when Hercules addressed him with the words, "Monsieur, où est la toilette?" with a slight Dutch accent combined with a French-sounding accent, the man showered him with a torrent of French words. Now what? Hercules, perplexed and at the same time trying to hold back the inevitable, pushed the man aside after a few seconds and stormed into the entrance, where, to his surprise, he saw the sign saying "Toilets outside" in Dutch on one of the walls. He immediately turned around and stormed back through the corridor past the by now quite surprised native, following the signs and eventually just in time for the moment supreme. Frank, meanwhile, had gotten out of the car, asked the startled man for understanding due to Hercules' lack of language skills. The man had tried to explain to Hercules that the toilets were located outside the building and was shocked by Hercules' reaction, but now understood. Hercules, who later found the humor in it when he thought of the astonished face of the castle owner, kept laughing until Bastogne and then left the conversation to Frank. A fun time with a lot of freedom despite customs at the border. He went to bed early that evening and slept very restlessly.